Hey, how's it going? My name's Matthew, aka EZBOT, and today we're going to talk about the easiest, fastest, and softest way to do resampling on the Octatrack. Right now we have a pretty fresh project loaded on the Octatrack. I threw down a couple drum samples on the first 4 tracks here, a kick, a snare, a hat, and then another cymbal. And I made a really quick pattern. I wanted it to be fairly obvious when I took instruments out. You might notice some volume changes as I remove instruments. That's because this is running into a bus compressor. But what we want to talk about here is how to resample all these tracks down to one track and how we can do it super fast. And you can just always do it. You don't have to set up special tracks or do some sort of weird workaround to make it be convenient. It actually is really convenient on the Octatrack. I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm just going to take any track. It doesn't matter what track I choose. We're just going to use an existing recording buffer. Every one of your tracks on the Octatrack has a recording buffer that you have access to at all times. We've talked about this before. And we're going to use that recording buffer, and we're going to use the shortcut to getting into the recording buffer that's always been available on the Octatrack. It's just something that isn't talked about very often. We're not going to use a flex track, and we're not going to select the record buffer, and we're not going to use one-shot trigs. We're going to do this so easy and so simply that it will blow your mind why you haven't been doing it this whole time. So I'm going to go over to track 5 just for the sake of not cluttering up my tracks. And like I mentioned before, we don't have to be on a specific track to do it. We could do it on the master track for all that matters. And yes, I have a master track on here. I always do, and I think everybody pretty much always does. So this example requires you to have a master track to do this well. But you don't have to use a master track. You can do whatever you want. So I'm going to go into Rec Setup 1, and here's where we're going to choose what we want to record. We want a summation of all these tracks. So we want to sum all these drum sounds down to one sample. We want them to be at the volume and the panning, so everything, all the information about the sounds we want to have preserved in our new sample. We don't want them to be any different than what we just heard. And that's how it's going to be. So here we're going to select source 3, and we're going to use track 8, which is a master track. I think most everybody using the Octatrack at this point is using master tracks on track 8. So you do have to sacrifice a track to use a master track, which is a bummer, but it's a necessity. So we're going to select track 8 because all these sounds get summed down into track 8. So we're going to sample this track's audio. What we want to do is select a length that we want to record for. We could record 4 bars, and we'll do 4 bars for now just to keep things simple. But we're going to deselect inputs A, B, C, and D, because we don't want to record anything coming in there. And I do have these machines hooked up. As you can see, all these cables down here are hooked up right now to my Octatrack, so I don't want to sample any sort of noise or anything that's coming from those machines. And we can leave it at trig 1-2. This isn't going to matter so much because we're using this record length, and we are going to use it all the way, so we're not going to be pressing to say end that trigger. Okay, now let's go over to Rec Setup 2. So right now I have it set up to have fades in and fades out. This isn't a necessity for what we're doing right now, but it is helpful when you're doing resampling of something more melodic where there's going to be some overlap of sounds. What we want to have selected is quantize record pattern length. So this means that the recording isn't going to start until it's at the beginning of the pattern. And whatever length you've selected for your pattern is going to determine when the recordings start. So if it's 64 steps, it's going to wait 64 steps before the recording starts again. The same idea applies to QPL, which is quantized playback. So this means that the sample won't play back after recording until after a designated amount of time. That doesn't matter to us right now, so we're going to leave that alone. But at this point, we're actually ready to do our sample. So I'm going to just start our pattern up, and I'm going to hit Rec 3. As you can see, the audio is flashing here, letting us know that audio is passing through internally. And now we're recording. As you can see, the plus symbol is activated, meaning that the recording has started. Now, we want to go into our audio editor, and usually we'd be looking at a waveform. We're not able to see the waveform right now because we're on a static track, and the audio editor is looking at the static track, which is empty. So what we want to do is switch our audio editor over to looking at the record buffer. You just go Function, Rec 3, and go Edit this recording, and here's our sample that we just made. I want to turn up this track level all the way to 127 so it doesn't attenuate any volumes. That way we hear it the same way that we just sampled it. Go back into that record buffer. Cool, it's at the exact same volume as our tracks that we programmed. Sounds good. Cool, now we have our first bounce down. So now what to do with this? So what we want to do is either go into our file settings here and save the sample. What we could do is go into Rec 3 and go save this recording, and we could save it as this timestamp that is provided for us. So now we can double press track 5 and go into select our sample. We can select that sample, and now we have that loaded into our static track, and we can look at it on here and do some slicing and editing. We could just go quick, create a slice grid, set it to slices, change our keyboard layout to slices. And now we have something cool that we can work with. We could just put down a bunch of triggers and do a bunch of random assignment of the slices to those triggers. So it's a really fast workflow to just start mangling audio. But what's great now is that we actually can remove these samples if we want, and now we would have this playing back all 4 of those samples layered down. So you can continue this process over and over until you have these really deep layered samples with a bunch of different sounds on it, and you can chop it up and mangle it over and over again, which is what the Octatrack is so good at. Let me show you another way for us to do the resampling. Take this trigger out, and we're gonna bring these drums back in, and this time we will select from these drums what we want to resample rather than just resampling the master track. So I'm gonna go back into Rec Setup 1, and our destination is actually going to be Q. And then I'm going to cue up the kick, the snare, and this cymbal right here. And now we're going to let our pattern play. We're gonna hear all the sounds, hit Rec 3, and just wait for it. You can see it's recording now. Cool. All right, now function Rec 3, edit this recording, and we're gonna hear something slightly different than our drum pattern because I queued up to listen to just track 1, 2, and 4. So we're not gonna have track 3 in this resample or mixdown. A better way to call it, I'd say, is a mixdown. Cool, so now we could save this recording, function Rec 3, save this recording, sure. I could assign it to self or to a free static, which would probably put it on track 6, I imagine. Yep. So there we go. Really simple, resampling on the Octatrack. It's a piece of cake. One last example. Let's just show that you can do this even on your master track. So let's go back into Rec Setup 1. Let's select track 8 again and turn this record length down to 16. Turn these off, and over here, quantize recording to the pattern length. I think that the pattern's only 16 steps long, so that's cool. All right, here we go. So we're gonna hit play. It's waiting until the master's finished. There we go, it's recording on the master track. Recorded for 16 steps. Function Rec 3, edit this recording. We're on the master track and we're looking at a mixdown. Because it's on a master track, there's no play functions enabled, so you're just gonna have to assume that it works. You're not gonna be able to audition your sample here, but you know that it works because I just demonstrated that. So here's a place that you could just resample, not necessarily audition your samples, but you can always do it on your master track. So if you've used up all your record buffers, 1 through 7, you still have record buffer 8 ready for you to do some sampling. So it's good to know that you can do it on the master track. However, you can't preview what you just resampled. My name's Matthew, aka EZBOT. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on the Elektron Octatrack, how to do the fastest and easiest resampling possible. If you would like to support me or support this channel so we can continue to make more content, go ahead and just like the video or leave a kind comment. You can also join my Patreon, which is patreon.com/EZBOT. If you want to get my performance templates for the Octatrack, visit coffee.com/EZBOT or patreon.com/EZBOT. Don't forget to join the Discord and have fun with your Octatrack.